It is said that beneath St. Peter's Basilica, beneath the marble that gleams like frozen moonlight, something still breathes. Not the kind of breath that stirs air or flickers candles, but the slow, patient exhale of memory itself. When the bells have ceased and the tourists have gone, when Rome hums its midnight lullaby beyond the walls, the basilica sinks into a sacred quiet, and within that quiet a whisper stirs beneath the marble floor. It begins with a single sound, a footstep, them soft, hesitant, echoing against centuries of devotion. The pilgrim does not know why he has stayed after hours. Perhaps he only meant to linger, to pray one last time before dawn. But the silence feels alive tonight, woven with something older than faith. He walks the long aisle between columns that shimmer in half-light, where saints carved in alabaster seem to watch, unblinking. The candles tremble as he passes, their wax breathing a faint scent of honey and dust. His reflection follows him in the polished marble, a faint double, flickering like a ghost. At the center of the basilica, beneath the dome that Michelangelo raised toward heaven, lies the high altar, a monument of splendor and mystery. Beneath it, so it is said, rests St. Peter himself, the fisherman who became the rock upon which the church was built. But the pilgrim does not look upward. He looks down. There, beneath the marble veins that gleam like frozen rivers, he imagines he can see a pattern. Faint lines like cracks but too deliberate, symbols perhaps or script. His candlelight pools across the floor, revealing a small circle carved so shallowly that centuries of footsteps have nearly erased it. In its center, a cross but not the cross of Rome, one arm curved into a spiral, its edges marked by stars. He kneels, tracing the grooves with his fingertips. The stone feels warm. It is then that he hears it, the faintest sound like a breath caught between walls. A whisper, or perhaps the echo of one. There are doors in the Vatican that few ever see. Hidden passages, narrow stairways built when faith and secrecy were one and the same. The pilgrim finds one behind the altar's shadow, an iron grate disguised as a vent. Beneath it, a stair spirals down into darkness. Candles guide his steps like small, uncertain moons. The air grows colder, thicker, laced with the scent of damp stone and incense long extinguished. He passes frescoes that have peeled to reveal older paintings beneath. Pagan gods with wings of fire, saints painted over their faces. Layers upon layers, belief built atop belief. As he descends, the whispers grow clearer. They do not speak words but a rhythm and a pulse, steady as the heart of the earth. It is said that these catacombs were once Roman tombs, taken over by the early Christians who buried their martyrs in the cool embrace of stone. But before them, before even the Caesars, this ground belonged to another faith entirely. The priests of Mithras worshipped here beneath the city of light. They too carved altars and offered blood to stars that no longer shine. The pilgrim walks past walls carved with symbols half familiar, half forbidden, spirals, serpents, suns encircled by wings. He feels that he is trespassing not upon history, but upon sleep itself, a place where belief still dreams. He reaches a chamber so small he must bow to enter. Inside, a single candle burns, though no one has been here for centuries. Its flame is steady, unmoved by wind. Before it stands a slab of stone, not quite an altar, not quite a tomb. Upon its surface rests a thin layer of dust that glows faintly in the candlelight. He brushes it away. Beneath lies an inscription in Latin, but the letters twist into a pattern unfamiliar to his eyes. He can read only fragments, ad caelum per terram, to heaven through the earth. A soft sound follows, the drip of water echoing through the stones. Each drop sounds like a word falling from an unseen mouth. Some believe that beneath St. Peter's Basilica lies not one tomb, but many. That the Vatican was not merely built upon Peter's grave, but upon the ruins of older sanctuaries, each generation sealing the last in silence. As if faith itself were an ever-deepening burial, the pilgrim lights another candle. Its flame flickers blue. He begins to see shapes in the walls, faces pressed into the rock like memories trying to emerge. Saints, perhaps, or sinners. The line between them feels blurred down here. He imagines he hears their voices, soft, overlapping murmurs that seem to rise not from air, but from the stones themselves. Beneath the basilica, one whisper sighs, The gods never left. They only changed their names. The pilgrim does not answer. He is trembling, but not from fear. Something about the air feels sacred, thick with unseen presence. He finds another doorway, smaller still, its arch carved with symbols of the moon. Passing through, he enters a chamber where time itself seems to hold its breath. The ceiling is low, dripping with mineral tears. In the center stands a well of black marble, its rim carved with 7 circles, the ancient mark of initiation. He looks into the well. It is dry but polished like glass, reflecting not his face but the ceiling above. And there, faintly visible, the painted figure of a man carrying keys made of gold. St. Peter. But beneath him, faintly visible beneath the paint, lies another figure entirely. Older, crowned with flame, holding a sun instead of keys. The two faces overlap, one faith bleeding into another. The pilgrim understands. The basilica above is not a monument over the old gods, but of them. The church had not erased what came before, only translated it. The divine reshaped, the sacred renamed. He closes his eyes. The air hums. The stone beneath him feels alive, as though the heart of the world beats somewhere below. Perhaps that is the true meaning of the whisper. Not voices of ghosts, but the memory of every prayer ever spoken here, layered so deep that the earth itself remembers. At last, he comes to a final corridor, narrower than all the rest. The air grows warmer. A faint light spills from somewhere unseen, golden and dust thick. The walls here are smooth, untouched by time, as if carved yesterday. At the end stands a door, plain, wooden, unmarked. No cross, no sigil, no lock. Only a single word carved faintly near the handle, Tacet. It is silent. He touches it. The wood feels warm, as if lit from within. The whispers cease. Even the sound of his breath fades. For a long time he stands there, hand upon the door, the silence pressing gently against his ears like a tide. He feels no need to open it. Whatever lies beyond is not meant for eyes or reason. It is the silence that guards the bones of saints, the breath that lingers between the mortal and the eternal. He kneels. Some truths, he realizes, are not kept to be discovered, but to remind us that mystery is sacred, that not everything divine must be spoken aloud. The candle in his hand burns lower. Its flame wavers once, twice, then steadies, a single star in a chamber of shadow. He whispers a prayer, though no words come. Only breath, only reverence. When he finally ascends, the basilica above has changed. The dawn light has entered through the stained glass, turning the marble floor to rose and gold. But the circle he traced to the spiral cross that drew him down is gone. Or perhaps it was never there. The tourists will soon return, and the sound of footsteps will again fill the sacred air. Yet for a moment longer, everything remains still. The statues, the candles, the air itself listening. He looks once more toward the altar. Beneath its splendor, the silence feels deeper now, alive. It is said that St. Peter was crucified upside down, believing himself unworthy to die as Christ did, that his head faced the earth, not the heavens. Perhaps that too was a secret. The truth that divinity lies below as much as above. The pilgrim turns to leave. His steps are slow, measured, as if not to wake what sleeps beneath. Outside, Rome glows with early light. The city breathes, ancient and unending. Behind him, beneath tons of marble and time, the whisper continues. Not a sound, but a presence. The whisper of the faiths that came before. The silence that shaped belief. The memory that has never died. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps some doors exist only to remind us that the sacred still hides beneath our feet. And if one listens in the hush between bells, one might still hear it, the whisper beneath the marble floor. It is said that deep within the secret archives of the Vatican, far beyond the corridors open to even the most privileged eyes, there rests a single drawer that no catalog dares to name. It is not locked, yet no hand has touched it in generations. The drawer hums faintly when the candles wane, as though something inside remembers being alive, and within it lies a parchment, a map, its edges curled like sleeping petals, its ink fading into veins the color of sepia and bone. Some call it the map of the lost pilgrim. Others call it the path to nowhere. But among those few who have glimpsed its shadow through glass, there are whispers that it was drawn by a monk who vanished from the Vatican in the winter of 1623. a man whose faith became too vast to fit within the world of walls and sermons. The story begins not with discovery, but with a sound, the faint creak of that drawer sliding open on its own. The archivist on duty that night would later say it was the cold. Others claim the drawer had been sealed since the time of Pope Gregory XVIII, its wood swollen shut by centuries of humidity. But the whisper of wood against wood, that slow, breath-like sound, drew him closer. Inside, beneath a shroud of vellum and dust, the parchment waited, its ink glimmering faintly in the candlelight. It was unlike any map he had ever seen. There were no continents, no coasts, no markers of land or sea. Instead, the lines coiled inward in delicate spirals, like veins or constellations drawn from memory. Small symbols drifted along the curves, a wing, a key, an open eye, a cross inverted and half erased. At the center of the spiral was a single word, written so faintly it seemed to breathe. Sub terra, beneath the earth. And there, in the dim room of relics and secrets, the archivist felt something awaken. Not fear, but recognition, as though he too had once dreamt of those same paths. It is said the map belonged to Brother Matteo di Lorenzana, a quiet Benedictine who came to Rome in the final years of the Renaissance. He was a man of letters and solitude, known for his calligraphy and for his habit of wandering the catacombs at dusk. In his journals, fragments of which remain in the Vatican's coded manuscripts, Matteo wrote of a vision that came to him in prayer, not of heaven above, but of heaven below. He dreamt of an Eden buried beneath the earth, a paradise that glowed in darkness where knowledge and faith met in silence. In one entry, his handwriting trembles. The surface blinds us. The stars we chase are not in the sky. The divine lies beneath our feet, waiting to be remembered. His peers called it blasphemy. The church forbade his research. And yet Matteo continued, sketching by candlelight, drawing what he saw in his dreams. The map was not a rebellion of politics or pride. It was a pilgrimage of the soul, an attempt to chart the geography of the unseen. He disappeared one winter's night, leaving behind his robe, his quill, and the unfinished map. The parchment was found days later, drying beside a puddle of melted wax as though he had been taken mid-stroke. Scholars who have studied the map claim it bears no earthly coordinates. The curves seem to echo organic forms, roots, rivers, the winding of DNA centuries before its discovery. Each curve leads to another symbol, each symbol to another threshold. At the outer edge, a sequence of dots marks a boundary labeled Adoram Silenti, to the shore of silence. From there, the lines descend inward, as if leading deeper into an unseen labyrinth. Some believe Matteo had studied ancient Roman diagrams of the underworld, blending Christian mysticism with pagan geometry. Others whisper that he was guided by older sources still, fragments of the Sibylline prophecies, or scrolls said to have come from the Temple of Solomon. But those who gaze too long at the map often describe a strange sensation, that the lines begin to move. They shift like smoke or veins pulsing beneath parchment skin. The paths rearrange themselves, as if the map were not drawn to lead the seeker anywhere fixed, but to mirror the journey of the soul itself. One legend says that if a candle burns beside the map for 7 nights, its wax will fall in the shape of a door. Another tells that on the 7th night, the map folds inward and disappears, leaving behind only the scent of frankincense and rain. In Matteo's notes, there is mention of an invisible river that runs beneath the Tiber. He wrote that he could hear it when the city slept, a subterranean current flowing from the catacombs toward an unseen sea. It carries not water, he wrote, but memory. Every word ever spoken to God travels upon its tide. Some believe he sought this river, tracing its imagined banks beneath Rome's foundations, through tunnels once carved by pagan priests, beneath temples long buried by basilicas. The map, perhaps, was his attempt to follow that current, to reach the place where all prayers meet in silence. If one studies the parchment closely, the lines do seem to ripple, as if drawn upon waves. Near the spiral's center lies a symbol resembling an oar, crossed with a quill. Beneath it, Flumen Verbi Dei, the river of God's word. It is here that historians begin to drift into poetry, for there are no proofs, only echoes. And perhaps that is the true nature of the map, not a direction but an invitation to listen. Along the lower curve of the spiral are painted small, faint leaves. They are arranged in patterns too deliberate to be decorative. Some botanists who examined the image recognized them, species extinct for centuries, flowers once used in ancient rites of healing and initiation. Matteo wrote of gardens that bloom in darkness. He described petals that opened only in moonlight, roots that grew toward shadow instead of light, life that flourished where no sun could reach. It is said he found these gardens in the crypts, in the silence of the dead. He claimed the air there shimmered with invisible pollen, and that he felt the breath of creation itself exhaling through the dust. Perhaps he was mad. Or perhaps he had seen what most men spend lifetimes avoiding. That darkness, too, can be sacred. That beneath the surface of faith, something ancient still blossoms unseen. At the heart of the map lies a spiral, perfect, unending. It begins as a faint curve, then tightens inward, its ink growing darker until it vanishes into a single point. But when viewed closely, that point blooms again into a new spiral, reversed, expanding outward. The symbol is both a descent and an ascent. The path inward is also the path back. Some interpret it as a metaphor for resurrection, others as the secret geometry of creation itself. Matteo may have believed that paradise and the underworld are not opposites but reflections, twin mirrors in which the divine contemplates itself. He wrote in his final note found beside the map, "Every descent is a form of prayer. The deeper one falls, the closer one comes to the light beneath the shadow." The last man to see the map by candlelight described what happened when he reached the spiral's center. He said the ink seemed to shimmer, then fade. The parchment softened, curling inward like a leaf in winter. The candle beside it burned lower, trembling as if moved by unseen breath. And then, nothing. When the archivist looked again, the map was gone. Only a thin layer of ash remained, arranged in the faint outline of a spiral. The candle had extinguished itself, leaving the room in utter darkness. For a moment, he swore he could hear the sound of water, slow, eternal, as though some hidden river were flowing just beneath the marble. Today, the drawer remains closed. No one can say whether the map was destroyed, or whether it simply folded itself back into the silence from which it came. But those who walk the corridors of the archives after dusk sometimes claim they hear soft scratching sounds, as if a quill were writing somewhere just out of sight. Others say the air smells faintly of wet parchment and candle smoke. It is said that when the basilica sleeps, a single drop of water falls beneath its foundations, striking stone in perfect rhythm, the heartbeat of the river Matteo sought, and some whisper that in certain dreams, the map reappears. Not as parchment, but as vision, lines of light beneath closed eyelids spiraling inward to a single luminous center. No one knows where it leads. Perhaps it leads nowhere at all, or perhaps it leads to the heart of all things, that sacred point where faith becomes silence and silence becomes the voice of God. Perhaps he was not lost. Perhaps he found the labyrinth at last, the one not built by walls but by wonder. And if you listen, beneath the hum of the world, beneath your own heartbeat, you might still hear it. The river flowing beneath the earth, the whisper of a quill tracing eternity, the map that leads into shadow. It is said that beneath the apostolic library, far below the frescoed ceilings and sunlit courtyards, there lies a room that does not breathe. No windows, no air that stirs, only the pulse of silence and the faint scent of ink that has never dried. Few have spoken of it. Fewer still have seen it. But in the still hours of night, when the Vatican's corridors sleep and the wax of its candles begins to weep, one might feel it, the slow heartbeat of something still writing beneath the marble floors. This is the chamber of eternal ink, and within it, it is said words are not written to be read. They are written to remember. It begins with a key that has no lock, a bronze feather, carved so finely that it seems made for air rather than metal. The key sits on a forgotten shelf, beneath ledgers of papal decrees and the sighing weight of centuries. It is dull with age except for one edge, the tip that gleams faintly, as if it has only just been touched. Behind a tapestry in the deepest hall of the library, There is a narrow passage invisible unless you already know it exists. At its end waits a door of black cedar, unmarked but for a single symbol burned into its center, a spiral drawn with a trembling hand. The archivists who tend to the living, books, the manuscripts that breathe, dust and golding are forbidden to speak of this place. It is a silence inherited, passed like a vow from one generation to the next. Yet some say that in the quiet hours before dawn, a few still descend, carrying a candle and a single quill. Beyond the cedar door lies a staircase that curves downward like a coil of script, its steps carved with words no longer legible. The deeper one goes, the more the air thickens, scented with something sweet and metallic, the fragrance of ink mingled with time. And then, the final step. Stone gives way to silence. A door of iron opens, not with a sound but with a breath. Inside the chamber there is no flame. The walls glimmer faintly with their own dim light. Not candlelight, but the sheen of ink so old it has begun to reflect memory. The room stretches farther than sight allows, its ceiling lost to shadow. Endless tables are set in rows, each holding scrolls, quills, and open books whose pages turn slowly of their own accord, as if stirred by invisible hands. This, they say, is where the custodians of silence once wrote. They were monks without names, chosen not for their faith but for their capacity to listen. Their task was sacred and forbidden, to record every truth the church could not bear to speak aloud. Not to preserve heresy, but to absolve it through remembrance, for even sin, they believed, must have a witness. Their pens were shaped from swan feathers and silver. Their ink was made of crushed obsidian, midnight oil, and the salt of their own tears. And their rule was simple: no word they wrote would ever see the sun. In this chamber, centuries unfolded like pages. Empires rose and fell, but still the custodians wrote, their quills whispering through the dark. They chronicled the letters of condemned mystics, the confessions of heretical saints, the dreams of those who saw God in shadows. They copied texts the world called dangerous, the Gospel of Mary, the lost verses of the Dead Sea, the prayers of prophets silenced by doctrine. Each line shimmered faintly upon the page, never quite drying. The ink remained alive, always moving, as if the words themselves resisted being imprisoned. It is said that when a custodian died, his final breath was used to anoint his last manuscript. In that moment, his voice would join the ink, absorbed into the letters he had written, where it would whisper forever. Those who entered, after him, claimed they could hear the murmuring of many tongues at once, and prayers and lamentations rising from the pages in a language older than faith itself. If one stands long enough within the chamber, a strange rhythm begins to emerge. The room breathes, slow and steady like the lungs of a sleeping giant. The parchment lifts and settles with each invisible inhalation. Some scholars once believed the movement was caused by the moisture of the air. Others whispered that the manuscripts themselves were alive, exhaling what humanity had tried to forget. Among the surviving fragments of the custodian's writings, there is one that speaks directly of this breath. The word of God does not vanish. It returns to the air, to the dust, to the silence. We do not write to preserve it. We write to remind the silence where it came from. It is a strange kind of faith, not the faith of believing, but the faith of remembering. The custodians understood that truth could not be destroyed, only hidden, and so they became its keepers, shaping their existence into an act of quiet rebellion, chronicling the forbidden so that even heaven might not forget. They wrote of the stars that guided Christ's birth, noting their alignment with the ancient constellations of Egypt and Babylon. They transcribed the secret hymns of the Gnostics, who said that God was not light, but the space between lights, the unseen stillness that holds all things together. Each word they inscribed was both devotion and defiance, inked in shadow, spoken only to silence. And still, the ink never dried. There are stories told among the Vatican's elder archivists, whispered at candlelit desks, when thunder rolls above the rooftops, that sometimes, late at night, a sound rises from beneath the library floors. Not footsteps, not wind, a soft, rhythmic scratching. It is said that when the world reaches certain hours of stillness, when no prayer is being spoken anywhere upon the earth, the custodians write again. Their quills move without bodies, their words appearing upon the endless pages as if drawn by breath alone. Some claim to have seen it, fresh lines appearing in the margins of ancient texts, their ink glimmering like dew. Others insist that the Vatican's climate is to blame, humidity, expansion, decay. But those who have heard the scratching know better. One priest long ago dared to open the cedar door and descend alone. When he returned, his hair had turned white, and his hands trembled as though from cold. He never spoke of what he saw except for one sentence. They are still writing. He lived out his days in silence, spending his final years tending candles near the altar. The ink stains on his fingertips never faded. Among the legends of the chamber, one story lingers with particular tenderness. It tells of a young scribe and a boy of 17 who was sent to assist the custodians. His task was simple, to prepare fresh quills to grind the ink. But in the solitude of that eternal chamber, he began to ask questions. He wondered what the words meant, these forbidden sentences that flowed across parchment like veins of night. One evening, unable to resist, he dipped his quill into the ink and began to write his own thoughts in the margins. He wrote not heresy, but longing. He wrote of doubt, not as sin, but as hunger. He wrote that perhaps God had hidden himself not to test mankind, but to protect them from his own light. When the monks discovered his writings, they did not punish him. They simply added his pages to the archives, binding them beside those of the saints and the heretics. Centuries later, when that same manuscript was found, the boy's ink was still wet. His words still glimmered like new rain, and in the quiet curve of a sentence, an unfamiliar scent lingered, not of ink but of breath. If you listen closely, you might still hear it. A soft sigh beneath the marble floors, the ghostly pulse of quills moving in darkness. The chamber of eternal ink has no clock, no season, no end. Time there folds upon itself like a manuscript endlessly rewritten. The ink never fades because it is made of memory. The distillation of everything humanity has dared to confess, then tried to forget. Perhaps that is why it remains hidden. The church, the world, the soul, and all have need of silence, of rooms that keep the unspoken safe. For not all truths are meant for daylight. Some must rest in darkness where they can breathe without judgment. It is said that when the last custodian dies, the chamber will close itself. The ink will still, and every page will turn to dust. Yet even then, the words will not vanish. They will dissolve into the air, invisible, eternal, the breath of every secret ever written, floating through the night. And perhaps, if you walk the halls of the apostolic library in the hour before dawn, you might feel it upon your skin, a faint, cool whisper, like ink moving beneath your veins. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And somewhere beneath the marble in prayer, the custodians still write, one letter at a time, one silence after another, keeping the sacred alive by never letting it dry. Beneath the earth, beneath the centuries, the chamber of eternal ink waits, a sanctuary of breath, shadow, and memory. And when all lights have gone out, it will still whisper in the dark. It is said that near the edge of the Vatican gardens, hidden behind an ivy-covered wall and a door that never quite opens all the way, there stands a statue so worn that time itself seems to have forgotten her. The marble has lost its face to the centuries. The features once delicate, now dissolved into a soft, nameless blur. The caretakers call her La Santa Silente, the silent saint. No record remains of who sculpted her, nor which martyr she was meant to portray. Her robes flow like water turned to stone, her hands clasped in a gesture not of prayer but of listening, as if she is waiting to receive a secret that the wind has not yet dared to deliver. Few come here. The corridor is narrow, shaded by cypress trees that sigh against the walls. Moss grows thick between the cobblestones, and the air smells faintly of dust and myrrh, the perfume of forgotten things. It is here, in this quiet passage, that the story begins. One winter evening in the late 17th century, a young nun was seen walking toward the statue at dusk. Her name was Sister Beatrice della Croce. Though the records that mention her are faint and inconsistent, the ink eaten by damp, the letters trembling as if written by a hesitant hand. She was said to be gentle, often silent, given to long walks in solitude. The other sisters pitied her quietness, believing it to be sorrow. But those who listened closely claimed that when she prayed, she spoke not to heaven, but to the earth. She came often to the statue, bringing a candle and a small notebook bound in rough leather. Night after night she would sit upon the cold stone steps before La Santa Silente and whisper softly into the air. What she said, no one knew. But it is written that one evening, as the first frost touched the cypress branches, she returned to her cell trembling. Her candle had gone out, yet the scent of burning wax clung to her habit. And in her journal that night she wrote a single line. She spoke, and the voice came not from heaven but from dust. It is said that Sister Beatrice heard not words but breath, a murmur like sand moving across glass, soft and infinite. At first she thought it a trick of wind, the rustle of leaves near the corridor, but when she knelt again before the statue, the sound deepened. The dust at her feet began to shift, swirling as though stirred by an invisible hand. From it rose a voice, faint, fractured, and impossibly old. "We remember what you forget," it said. "We speak what the living bury." Beatrice fell to her knees, not in fear but awe. She had prayed her whole life to hear the divine, and now something had answered, not from the heavens, but from the very ground that held the bones of saints. In the nights that followed, she returned again and again, each time writing what she heard in her notebook. She called these encounters conversations with dust. The dust, she wrote, was alive, composed of the remains of ink, parchment, and bone, each grain holding a memory of something once sacred. It carried the whispers of old manuscripts burned by decree, of relics sealed away, of prayers never spoken aloud. She described the dust as a choir made of what the world has chosen to forget, and the silent saint, she believed, was its vessel, the threshold through which the buried voices of history could pass. Her writings grew more elaborate with each entry, written in a delicate hand that trembled between sanity and revelation. In one passage, she described standing before the statue and seeing not marble, but flesh, the faint outline of a woman formed from moonlight and ash. Her eyes, though faceless, seemed to glow with the memory of centuries. When the figure spoke, her voice echoed through the stones, through the dust itself, as though the entire corridor had become a living breath. Beatrice saw visions in those moments. A corridor of stars spiraling beneath the earth, where angels walked barefoot across manuscripts glowing like embers, a vault so vast it seemed to hold every word ever written, each one asleep within glass vessels of air. A hand, neither divine nor human, writing upon the surface of water with ink made of light. In her journal, she confessed that the visions did not frighten her. They soothed her. For the first time, she wrote, I understood that silence is not the absence of God. It is his oldest language. But her newfound serenity began to unsettle the convent. The sisters whispered of possession, of madness, of something unholy speaking through her. One evening, her confessor forbade her visits to the statue. Yet even in obedience, she could not resist the pull of the corridor. A month passed before she returned. The air that night was cold enough to crack stone. Beatrice carried no candle, only her small journal and a handful of parchment scraps she had gathered from the library's wastebasket. She knelt before La Santa, Silente once more, and laid the parchment upon the ground. Dust clung to the pages like frost, and in the faint light of the moon she saw something impossible. The dust began to write. Letters formed slowly, curling like smoke. Words appeared, not in Latin, not in any language she knew, but in a script that shimmered between form and meaning. She watched in stillness as the phrases arranged themselves into a spiral, the same symbol carved faintly upon the saint's pedestal. The spiral, she realized, was a doorway, not of stone or light, but of memory. And in that moment she saw it open before her. What she described next in her journal reads like a dream. I was beneath the earth, yet surrounded by stars. A great vault stretched before me, a cathedral made not of stone but of pages. Scrolls drifted through the air like white birds. The walls breathed softly as though the entire place were alive. And there, between two pillars of dust, I saw the faces of those who had written before. Scribes, monks, prophets, their mouths closed, yet their words filled the air around me. They were waiting, listening, and then the voice of the saint came again, softer now, closer to my ear than thought itself. Every silence is a story waiting to return to dust. Beatrice awoke the next morning upon the cold stone floor, her journal resting on her chest. The dust around her had settled into perfect circles, After that night, Sister Beatrice was never quite the same. She smiled more, though she spoke less. The other nuns found her wandering the gardens at dawn, touching the leaves as if reading them like scripture. She began to copy passages from her journal and slip them into cracks in the chapel walls, as though planting them like seeds. Some of these fragments were later found, thin scraps of parchment, written in faint brown ink that shimmered when held to the light. One reads, "Faith is not built in light. It is written in dust, erased by time and rewritten by breath." Another simply says, "Listen to the silence. It remembers you." And then one winter evening, Sister Beatrice disappeared. Her bed was found neatly made, her rosary still on the pillow. The door to her cell was locked from within. Only her journal remained. Inside, the final page was blank, except for a small scattering of dust across the paper, shaped faintly like a handprint. Centuries have passed since then. The statue still stands, her face worn smooth by wind and time. The ivy grows thicker, the corridor quieter. The Vatican records list no mention of Sister Beatrice anymore. It is as though she never existed. Yet sometimes, in the stillness after rain, when the air smells of earth and parchment, those who walk near the gardens claim they can hear a whisper, faint as breath against stone. They say it comes from beneath the statue's base, where dust gathers no matter how often it is swept away. It sounds like the turning of pages, like the soft exhale of someone about to speak. Perhaps it is nothing more than the breeze through the trees. Or perhaps, as Beatrice believed, it is the memory of every word that ever sought to reach heaven and fell gently back to earth instead. There are those who believe that the dust beneath, La Santa Silente, holds the last fragments of her journal, pages that turn to powder yet refuse to scatter, their meaning preserved in the air itself. When sunlight falls upon the marble, a faint shimmer moves across her clasped hands. Not gold, not reflection, but something quieter, like a sigh remembered by stone. It is said that if one kneels before her and listens with patience, truly listens, they might hear the echo of that ancient voice. Not loud, not clear, but soft and patient as sleep. All things that live will return to dust, and all dust will one day learn to speak again. Perhaps Sister Beatrice was never lost. Perhaps she became the silence itself, the soft pulse of memory between prayer and forgetting. And if you listen, beneath the rustle of the cypress leaves, beneath the quiet breathing of the earth, you may still hear her, the saint who spoke to dust, the dust that still whispers back. It is said that deep within the heart of the Vatican, beneath the marble corridors and gilded halls, below the archives where popes have sealed away centuries, there exists a room that does not belong to time. It is not marked on any map, nor written in any record. Some say it was never built, only remembered into being. Others whisper that it waits, patient and invisible, until it is ready to be found, and but never by those who seek it. They call it the library without a door. On quiet nights, when the basilica sleeps and the moon drifts pale across the Vatican's domes, a man walks its corridors in solitude. He is the night watchman, one of many, though the others seem never to notice him. He moves slowly, lantern in hand, its flame soft and unhurried. The echo of his steps dissolves into the stone as though the walls have long since learned to breathe in silence. He has no name in this story, or perhaps he has too many. He came here years ago drawn by something he could not name, a promise perhaps, or a memory that was never his. Each night he passes the same doors, the same frescoes of saints and sinners, the same long corridors that smell faintly of wax and dust. And yet every night something shifts, almost imperceptibly. One evening he dreams of keys. Hundreds of them, keys of bronze and bone and silver, each humming with sound, though none fit any lock he knows. When he wakes, the scent of old parchment lingers in the air, though his small room contains no books. That night, the halls feel different. The air hums faintly, as if a great bell is ringing somewhere beyond hearing. And when he pauses beside a wall of carved stone, he hears a voice, soft, patient, calling him by name. He follows the whisper. It leads him down a staircase he has never noticed before, narrow, spiraling, wrapped in darkness. His lantern flickers, its flame bending toward the walls as though drawn by unseen breath. At the bottom, he finds a passage where no passage should be. The marble gives way to smooth stone, veined with light. There are no doors here, no hinges or handles, only walls that curve and shimmer faintly, like glass reflecting something that is not there. And yet, the moment he steps forward, the passage opens. Not by mechanism, not by sound, but by knowing, as though the walls remember him. Inside, the air is neither cold nor warm, it simply is. It hums with quiet resonance the way the air does in cathedrals after prayer has ended. Before him stretch shelves, endless, curving like the arc of a celestial body. They are filled with books, scrolls, fragments of letters, tablets carved with languages the world no longer speaks. Some are bound in leather that seems to breathe. Some glow faintly from within. Others rest open, their pages turning slowly as though a wind passes through them from another age. The watchman stands still, his lantern trembling in his hand, and though he has no memory of ever entering this place, it feels like returning home. He begins to walk. The floor beneath him gleams like polished obsidian, reflecting faint shapes that move just beyond the edges of light. The books hum, not loudly, but like distant choirs, their voices layered, eternal. It is said that every word ever spoken, every thought ever born finds its echo somewhere. Perhaps this is where those echoes rest. As he passes the first aisle, he notices inscriptions etched into the shelves. Not all who forget are lost. Further along, the first word was silence. He feels a weightless pull toward a particular book, slim, bound in white cloth. When he opens it, there are no words inside, only faint impressions, as if the text has been erased by centuries of light. But when he breathes upon the page, letters bloom like frost on glass. The handwriting is familiar. It is his own. You were never meant to guard the living, it reads. You were meant to remember the forgotten. The words fade as quickly as they appear, leaving only the scent of dust and lavender. He turns to another shelf. The books here pulse softly, as though alive. One opens of its own accord, revealing moving images, memories of a world before language, before time measured itself in days. He sees mountains rising like breath, oceans folding into themselves, stars falling into ink. He closes the book, trembling. Somewhere in the distance, a clock begins to tick, though there are no clocks in the room. As the hours stretch, the watchman begins to understand that not all the volumes here were written by human hands. Some hum with the rhythm of thoughts, prayers, regrets, dreams, things never spoken aloud. He walks past a shelf filled with what look like illuminated manuscripts. Their letters shimmer in gold and cobalt blue. But when he leans closer, he realizes the words are moving, rearranging themselves like living constellations. The sentences breathe, folding inward, vanishing, reappearing. One book sighs as he touches it, exhaling dust like breath. Another weeps ink, its pages damp with unseen sorrow. In one corner of the vast room, he finds a glass case. Inside rests a single feather, black endless, still glistening as though freshly plucked. Beneath it, a small plaque reads, "The word that fell." He doesn't understand, yet he feels its truth. Further on, he finds a collection of journals written in different hands, all sharing the same title, "The Memory of Those Who Never Existed." He opens one. Inside are stories, lives fully formed, names and histories and deaths of people no record has ever known. Their handwriting varies, but the ink smells the same: old rain, candle smoke, and time. Perhaps, he thinks, these are the souls that never came to be, the thoughts that lingered too softly in the mind of creation. He reads for what feels like hours or days or perhaps centuries. Here, time is not counted by minutes, but by the turning of pages. Each story he touches dissolves into light, seeping into his skin. He begins to forget where he is. At some unseen hour, the air shifts. The shelves seem to bend toward him, the space breathing slower. The lantern flame quivers, though no wind moves. He realizes then that he cannot recall how he entered the library, or who he was before. When he looks down, he sees that the keys he once carried are gone. In their place rests a small slip of parchment. Upon it, written in the faintest ink, is a single sentence. The seeker becomes the story. A stillness comes over him. Around him, the books begin to hum in a deeper tone, a sound like heartbeat and ocean and prayer. The shelves curve, their spines glimmering in spirals, as if the entire library is inhaling. He feels no fear, only a vast, tender recognition, as though he is dissolving into something that has always waited for him. Perhaps he has not found the library at all. Perhaps it has found him. He closes his eyes. The air thickens. The sound of pages turning becomes the sound of waves. The scent of parchment fades into the scent of rain. When he opens his eyes, he no longer knows whether he stands or drifts. The books glow softly, their letters floating upward like fireflies. His lantern goes out, and yet the room is full of light. Outside, the bells of dawn begin to toll. But down here, beneath the Vatican's marble bones, time no longer answers to bells. The library breathes once more, a long, slow sigh, and everything settles. The shelves stand silent again. The books rest, their whispers folding into the stillness. The floor gleams like dark water, reflecting nothing. The watchman is gone. Or perhaps he has simply become part of what he once guarded, and somewhere among the shelves a new book appears, thin, unmarked, waiting. Inside, on the first page, is a single sentence written in fresh ink. He entered without a key, and left without a name. The rest of the pages remain blank, though when one looks too long, faint shapes begin to stir. The outline of corridors, the glimmer of a lantern, a voice whispering through the dark. The library without a door does not reveal itself again for many years. And when it does, it never appears in the same place twice. Some say it lives not beneath the Vatican, but beneath the mind, in that quiet space between memory and dream, between what we have read and what has read us. Others believe it opens only to those who have forgotten why they seek knowledge at all. But all who have found it tell the same story, that inside there is no door, no beginning, no end, only the infinite hush of words that remember themselves. And when they wake, they cannot recall what they have read, only the feeling of being written by something vast, tender, and eternal. Perhaps the library was never a place. Perhaps it was a moment, a breath of creation repeating itself, a prayer spoken by the dust of unwritten stories. And perhaps when all books fade and all voices fall silent, one will still remain, the book that cannot be opened because it was never closed. The library without a door, the place where knowing and forgetting become the same act, where silence at last becomes the only true book. It is said that beneath the basilica, where the light of day never reaches, there lies a vault older than prayer. Its air is thick with centuries of breath, the weight of devotion pressed into stone. Down there, beneath layers of marble and faith, dust gathers in sacred stillness, the dust of popes, of saints, of forgotten witnesses. And in the winter of 1902, beneath the lowest chamber of that vault, they found it, a small reliquary, gilded with age and silence. Inside, a mummified hand, the fingers folded not in blessing but in offering. And resting within its palm, clasped gently as though even in death it still protected it, was a golden key. The church called it a relic. The scholars called it a cipher. The people whispering in candlelight called it the key of the sleeping apostle. The discovery was quiet, almost accidental. A group of restorers had been working beneath the basilica, repairing foundations warped by centuries of shifting earth. One of them, a young mason named Luca, struck something hollow with his chisel. They cleared away the rubble and found the box, sealed with crimson wax so old it cracked beneath their touch. The wax bore no papal mark, no crest, only a spiral, faint, unending. Inside, the hand was perfectly preserved, as if time had chosen to sleep beside it. The key it held glowed faintly, not with reflected light but with its own muted warmth, a sheen like breath upon glass. The priests ordered the vault sealed again. The relic was lifted with silk gloves wrapped in linen and carried upward into the world of the living. But from the moment it emerged, the basilica seemed changed. Candles flickered for no reason. Bells tolled without wind. The walls, it was said, began to listen, and the dream of the key began to spread. It was Father D'Amico who first claimed the key was not meant to open anything made by human hands. In his journal, now kept in the restricted archives, he wrote, "It unlocks not a door of wood but of belief, not of place but of silence." Others disagreed. The relic drew scholars from across Europe, men with spectacles and notebooks, their fingers trembling with reverence and curiosity. They measured, sketched, debated. The key was small, no larger than a child's thumb, its bow carved in the shape of a serpent devouring its own tail, the eternal circle. Upon its shaft, faint letters gleamed in Latin, ad somnum veritatis. To the sleep of truth, it was not merely ornament. The teeth of the key bore no symmetry. They were arranged like music, like language. Some believed it encoded a psalm, others a cipher meant to guide the faithful through hidden chambers below the Vatican. And yet, each who studied it dreamed of the same thing, a door made not of stone, but of light. A door that pulsed like a heartbeat waiting to be opened. The archivist dreamed it first. He awoke whispering that the door had no keyhole, that the key must be turned within the soul. Days later, he was found slumped over his desk, his hand clutching a copy of the key drawn in ink. The lines of his sketch bled into one another, forming a perfect spiral. The Pope himself forbade further study. He declared it a sacred mystery, a silence to be kept. But the silence did not hold. Whispers tell that the hand in which the key was found belonged to an apostle, though which one, none can say. Some claim it was St. Thomas the Doubter, whose faith was found only through touch. Others insist it belonged to a lesser-known disciple, erased from Scripture for the questions he dared to ask. Whoever he was, the title Sleeping Apostle took root. It is said he was buried alive at his own request, entombed with the key that could unlock the truth he feared to speak. His followers believed that when the world was ready, his hand would open once more. The bones found in the reliquary were tested by the scholars of the age. They claimed the flesh was human, yes, and but older than Rome itself. One fragment of parchment lay beside the hand, so brittle it nearly dissolved when touched. Upon it was written a single phrase in Greek: "When the last lock opens, the world will remember it was never closed." As the years passed, the key of the sleeping apostle became more than metal. It became metaphor. Preachers spoke of it as the key to salvation, not a relic to be turned, but a truth to be understood. That to be locked away was not to be imprisoned, but to be kept safe, guarded within the heart until faith itself was ready to awaken. Others took a darker view. They said the key represented humanity's longing to trespass, to open the forbidden, to see what was meant to remain veiled. One theologian wrote, "The divine must be kept secret, else it dies of exposure." In quiet chambers, monks meditated upon the paradox, that freedom and confinement were one, that heaven might itself be a lock, and faith, the key that fits by never turning. The key was displayed only once, on the feast of St. Peter. Thousands gathered to see it beneath glass, its surface glowing like dusk upon gold. Yet as the sun set that evening, the glow dimmed, and the light within seemed to move, curling like smoke, as though the key were breathing. That night, the relic vanished. No sign of theft, no broken locks, no footprints. The case stood empty, the linen untouched. Only a faint imprint remained upon the glass, shaped like a hand in prayer. Over the years that followed, the legend of the key scattered like seeds across time. A child in Rome claimed to dream of a hand offering her a golden light that turned to dust in her palms. A monk in Lisbon awoke to find a spiral drawn in ash upon his cell floor. An old archivist, near death, confessed that he had once held the true key hidden in his sleeve for decades, unable to return it, unable to let it go. He died smiling, whispering, "It is home again." Each story folded upon the last like pages in an unending book. And through them all the same message seemed to whisper, "The key is not to open, it is to remember." In later years, restorers searching beneath the basilica again uncovered the same chamber where the reliquary had once been found. The air was dry, untouched by time, and there in the hollow of the same stone lay the hand once more. Empty now, its fingers gently curled toward the earth. No gold. No shine. Only the faint outline of where the key had rested, like the memory of light. The priests sealed it once again. They prayed, but some could not help wondering, had the key returned by its own will? Had it ever truly left? Because that is how these stories go. The sacred does not vanish. It circles. What leaves us returns, changed but whole. The lock becomes the door becomes the question. And so the basilica continues its long, patient breathing. Tourists walk its marble floors unaware that somewhere beneath, in darkness older than Rome, a sleeping hand still guards its secret. It is said that on certain nights, when the air is still and the candles flicker without flame, a faint metallic chime can be heard echoing from beneath the altar, the sound of something turning very slowly. Though no key is seen, the key of the sleeping apostle has not been found again. Or perhaps it has, in disguised as metaphor, hidden in dreams, folded within the faith of those who no longer need proof. There are stories of a golden glimmer appearing in the hands of the dying, a warmth like sunlight beneath the skin, as if something long locked within the soul has remembered how to open. And there are those who believe that the key was never meant for doors of stone or gates of heaven. It was forged for the heart, that quiet chamber where doubt and faith entwine. To turn it is not to unlock, but to surrender. To open is to fall asleep, into belief, into silence, into that sacred space where questions dissolve into light. Perhaps that is why they called it the sleep of truth. Not because the truth is dead, but because it rests, waiting for those who will one day remember the way to listen. And if, on some moonless night, you walk near the basilica and feel the ground hum beneath your feet, do not be afraid. It is only the sound of the lock turning, slowly, softly, as the world dreams itself open again. For the key was never lost. It only sleeps. It is said that within the walls of an abandoned chapel, one that no bell has called to prayer for centuries, there stands a mirror that remembers more than it reflects. The chapel lies on the edge of the Vatican gardens, hidden behind cypress and shadow. Once it was a place of confession and song. Now its doors are swollen with time, its marble cracked by the patient roots of ivy. The air inside tastes of incense and rain. The candles, long cold, still lean toward the altar as if yearning for flame. In the farthest corner, where the light fades into dust, something waits. A shape half forgotten, cloaked in black silk. The silk is torn at the edges, frayed like the hem of an old priest's robe. Beneath it, whispers say, lies a mirror, the mirror of forgotten saints. The story begins with an archbishop, a man whose name the church no longer speaks. In the waning years of his life, he sealed himself within that chapel, refusing visitors, refusing the sunlight that once streamed through its rose window. He prayed not to be forgiven, but to be forgotten. One evening, as the story goes, he received a mirror from a monastery in Florence. It was an antique, its glass darkened by centuries, its frame carved from olive wood adorned with faint symbols that predated Christianity itself. The courier who delivered it claimed it had been found in the ruins of an Etruscan tomb, wrapped in silk, unbroken, untouched. The archbishop placed it in the corner of the chapel, facing the altar. For days he prayed before it. Then one night he covered it with black silk, and never looked upon it again. When asked why, he whispered only this: "It does not show what we are. It shows what still remembers us." He died soon after, and the chapel was sealed. Centuries passed. The world moved on, yet the mirror remained, and a veiled, silent patient. Those few who entered the chapel afterward, caretakers, restorers, wanderers, spoke of unease, of the air that seemed to hum around the covered glass. One said the shadows there were thicker, as if the mirror drew light toward itself. Another claimed that when he passed near, he heard a soft rhythmic sound, not quite breath, not quite whisper. It is said that one monk, Father Anselmo, dared to lift the veil. He was young, curious, convinced that holiness could not fear reflection. He uncovered the mirror by candlelight, expecting only to see himself, a man of flesh and devotion. What he saw, he never fully described. He spoke of figures standing behind him, their faces calm and pale as wax, of robes that shimmered without motion, of hands folded in endless prayer. He turned, but no one was there. And when he looked back to the glass, the faces were closer, He covered the mirror and fled. Within a week, he had taken a vow of silence. Others followed, each drawn by curiosity, each leaving changed. One claimed the mirror showed not ghosts but memory itself, the imprint of belief lingering in the air. Another swore that when he gazed into it, he saw his own reflection begin to age, then fade entirely, leaving only the faint outline of a saint carved in light. It became a quiet legend within the city, a secret spoken of only in whispers, that there was a mirror which did not reflect the living, but the faithful who had been. Whispers tell us the mirror has a hunger, not for blood or soul, but for remembrance. Every century or so it awakens. The silk shifts, the air trembles, and faintly across the surface of the cloth faces appear, outlines pressed from within. They vanish before dawn. Scholars once argued that such stories were metaphors, that the mirror symbolized conscience, or the divine gaze. But those who stood in the chapel spoke differently. They said the mirror did not symbolize anything. It was a presence, a threshold where faith itself looked back. Beneath the soot of centuries, its frame bears three carvings, a star, a spiral, and an open eye. The star, some believe, marks creation, the divine spark. The spiral, the passage of belief through time, from birth to death to prayer. And the eye, the watcher who never closes. One priest, long ago, wrote in a hidden journal that he saw within the mirror, a cathedral made of memory. He said each face he glimpsed belonged to someone whose name the world had forgotten. Monks who wrote gospels now buried. Women who prayed in silence, saints denied their sainthood. Their reflections lingered like soft flames, flickering but never dying. The mirror, he wrote, is where faith remembers itself. But the mirror remembers more than faith. It remembers us. There are tales, scattered through convent diaries, lost letters, margins of forbidden manuscripts, of those who saw not saints in the mirror, but something else. A pilgrim once claimed that when he looked upon it, he saw himself as a child kneeling in a field of silver dust, whispering a prayer he could no longer recall. A scholar from Bologna described a vision of her future, an old woman still searching for meaning, her hands trembling, her eyes filled with quiet acceptance. She closed the mirror and never wrote again. And one story, too strange to believe, tells of a blind novice who entered the chapel at night, unaware of the mirror's legend. She stood before the veiled frame, sensing its pull, and said aloud, "Show me the light." When she returned to her cell, she told her sisters she had seen not light, but faces, countless faces, each one smiling softly through the dark. They were not saints, she whispered. They were waiting. She died in her sleep that night. Her last words, recorded by her sisters, were these: "The reflection is not in the glass. It is in us." Theologians who dared to consider the mirror's meaning found themselves caught in paradox. If faith is light, what is its reflection? Some argued that the mirror was a vessel of divine memory, that belief leaves an echo even after death. Others feared it was something older, a relic from the time before the church, when mirrors were seen as thresholds to the underworld. In ancient rituals, it was believed that to see one's reflection by candlelight was to glimpse the soul divided, half in this world, half in another. Perhaps, they suggested, the mirror of forgotten saints holds that same echo, a remnant of a time when the sacred was not separate from the dark, when seeing and believing were one act. It is said that the archbishop who first veiled it was not hiding evil, but mercy, for he believed that to look upon the divine too closely was to lose oneself in its reflection. He called it the kindness of darkness, the veil that allows us to remain human in the face of eternity. And so the mirror sleeps, covered once more, its surface dreaming beneath the black silk. Today the chapel stands forgotten. Its doors creak in the wind. Its windows sigh with rain. Visitors walk past without knowing the secret that waits inside. The mirror remains veiled and patient as centuries drift by. But there are those who say that when the moon is full and the bells of St. Peter's toll midnight, a faint shimmer rises from beneath the silk, like the breath of glass. The air hums softly, and if one listens closely, a voice can be heard. Not words, but a rhythm like distant prayer. Some nights the veil trembles. And if one were to lift it, though none have dared in many years, and the mirror would not show your face. It would show the memory of every prayer you've forgotten to say, every moment of faith you let slip away, every echo of those who believed before you, standing quietly in the corners of time, waiting for your reflection to join theirs. Perhaps that is the mirror's secret, not to reveal the divine, but to remind us that we too are reflections in a greater gaze, that the light we seek has always watched from within the dark. When the silk falls back into place, the chapel grows silent once more. Dust drifts like incense in the air. The stone sighs. Outside, the world continues, unaware of the faces sleeping beneath the glass, the saints who remember us in silence. Perhaps the mirror was never meant to be looked upon. Perhaps it was never meant to show, but to listen, and perhaps if we ever stand before it, we will understand that faith does not live in light alone, but in the quiet space where light meets its shadow. For the divine, too, must sometimes close its eyes, and in that darkness, beneath the veil, the forgotten saints still whisper. It is said that within the walls of the Vatican, where marble and silence have learned to breathe together, there lies a courtyard sealed to all but a few. No map records it. No guide speaks its name. Its gate bears no crest, only a symbol carved in the shape of a vine spiraling into a circle. Life without end, death without beginning. By daylight, it appears as any other cloistered garden, its paths worn by time, its fountains dry. But when the sun descends beyond the domes and the bells of St. Peter's fade into dusk, something stirs. The air thickens, the earth exhales, and the unseen begins to bloom. They call it the garden that never died. No one is allowed to enter it after sunset. The rule is older than memory, older even than Rome itself. For beneath its soil, it is said, sleep the roots of every prayer ever whispered into the earth. The pleas of saints, the tears of the repentant, the silent breath of those who once believed, and sometimes, when the moon is full and the wind still, the garden remembers them. The story begins with a young botanist. Her name has been forgotten by history, or perhaps erased by it. She was a student of the papal gardens, chosen for her quiet devotion to the study of plants. Her notebooks were filled not with words of faith, but of leaves and petals, the delicate mathematics of creation. When her superiors summoned her one winter evening, she expected routine duty, to tend the olive trees, to study the rare orchids brought from the east, but instead, she was handed a brass key and a warning spoken in whispers. You may enter, but only until dawn. Do not pluck, do not cut, and above all, do not pray aloud. The young woman nodded, though her heart stirred with unease. She did not know why the warning felt less like instruction and more like a plea. She passed through the narrow corridors of the apostolic palace, her lantern casting slow circles of gold upon the walls. The night air was still, carrying the faint scent of myrrh. At last she found the gate, heavy, iron, and entwined with vines that glimmered faintly in the moonlight, as though they were breathing. She turned the key. The gate side opened and the garden awakened. At first glance it was ordinary, ancient trees heavy with shadow, ivy curling across broken stone. But as the lantern's flame trembled, the light revealed something else. The garden seemed to pulse, a slow rhythm beneath the soil, like the heartbeat of something vast and dreaming. The young botanist stepped carefully along a path of pale marble, worn smooth by centuries. Around her, the air was rich with fragrance, not one scent but many. Rose and cypress, cedar and ash, lavender and something older, unnamed. She knelt beside a patch of white lilies. Their petals glowed softly as though lit from within. When she touched one, the bloom shuddered, and a whisper rose, faint and human, as if the flower had exhaled a memory. Forgive me. The voice vanished into the night. She drew back, breathless. Then she noticed it. Beneath every plant, the soil shimmered faintly, flecks of gold mingled with earth. The roots were woven together, forming a vast network that seemed to hum, not with wind, but with thought. Somewhere behind her, the fountain stirred. Its basin, dry for centuries, filled itself not with water, but with light, a pale, liquid glow that rippled in silence. It was then she understood. The garden was not alive in the way of ordinary things. It was awake. It is said that certain places hold memory, that stone and soil remember what they have witnessed. But this garden was more than memory. It was language. As the botanist moved deeper into its heart, the plants began to respond to her presence. The vines unfurled toward her lantern. The flowers leaned closer, petals trembling as though they longed to speak. And then, they did, not in words but in breaths, in sighs and murmurs. In the faint rustle of leaves forming syllables older than scripture, she heard fragments of prayer, some in Latin, some in languages that no longer exist. 1,000 voices layered upon one another, whispering to the stars, to the soil, to the silence that lives between them. Remember us. We believed. We are still here. Her heart trembled. Every vine, every blossom, every blade of grass seemed to contain a soul. The garden was a cathedral made of roots, each one a relic of the living and the dead. She knelt by a cluster of withered herbs, touching their leaves with care. Beneath her fingers they bloomed again, green and fragrant, as though her touch had reminded them of sunlight. But the scent that rose was not of life. It was of time. It carried the sweetness of candles extinguished in prayer, the salt of tears shed upon stone, the faint, sacred bitterness of faith that endures even when it cannot see. The botanist's lantern dimmed. The air thickened, heavy as a dream. She could feel the garden breathing, a slow inhale that seemed to pull her own breath away, and in that breath, she saw it. A vision, not before her eyes, but within her mind. The garden as it once was, well, when the world was young, when the soil still remembered paradise. She saw figures kneeling in moonlight, their hands pressed to the earth, their prayers sinking into the roots like water. She saw trees grown from tears, blossoms from longing, ivy from forgotten psalms. The garden had never died because it was never meant to live as we understand life. It was faith given form, a living memory of devotion itself. Hours passed, or perhaps centuries. Time dissolved in that place, replaced by rhythm. The beating of her heart echoed the pulse of the soil. She wandered to the center of the courtyard where an ancient fig tree stood. Its bark was pale and smooth, its roots spreading like veins across the marble. At its base, the ground shimmered with golden dust. The young woman knelt and pressed her hand into the earth. The soil was warm. And beneath it she felt movement, gentle like the turning of pages. 1,000 roots stirred beneath her fingers, and from them rose the faint scent of myrrh and rain. When she withdrew her hand, it glowed faintly. Her skin was dusted with gold, not metallic but luminous. As if light itself had stained her, she tried to wipe it away, but it would not fade. The realization came slowly, like dawn through fog. The gold was not dust, but memory. The garden had marked her, as it marked all who entered. It had given her a piece of itself, and in return it had taken something. Her doubt, her sense of time, her belonging to the ordinary world. She knelt again, bowing her head, though she did not know if what she felt was worship or grief. As the first light of morning crept over the walls, the garden began to dim. The flowers closed their petals. The whispering roots fell silent. The fountain's glow sank back into the stone. The botanist stood alone, the air still humming softly in her ears. The gate behind her had vanished, or perhaps it had never been there. She walked toward where it should have been, carrying her lantern unlit, her hands gleaming faintly in the dawn. When she looked back once more, the garden was gone. Only an empty courtyard remained, plain and cold, its soil dry and gray. She left through another path, her thoughts quiet, her body light. The gold upon her hands did not fade. It shimmered softly for days, then weeks, until she finally realized it was not gold at all. It was light, the residue of something eternal pressing gently through her skin. She never found the garden again. She searched, of course, wandering through hidden gates, through cloisters and ruins, through dreams that felt too real. But it never returned, for the garden is not a place. It is a moment when life remembers its own eternity. And still, within the Vatican walls, beneath the marble and the murmurs of prayer, something stirs. The soil sleeps, but not deeply. The roots hum, but faintly. The air holds a quiet fragrance, like breath waiting to return. Some nights, the gardeners who tend the courtyards claim to see a faint shimmer, a flicker of gold in the moonlight, as if a hand has brushed the soil and blessed it once more. They say it is the botanist walking still, or perhaps the garden remembering her. For memory is a form of life, and the earth, like the soul, does not forget what it has loved. Perhaps the garden never died because nothing sacred ever truly does. Perhaps every prayer whispered into the ground blooms again somewhere unseen. in roots that still breathe beneath our feet. And perhaps, and if you are quiet enough, and the night is kind, you might feel it too. The faint pulse beneath the earth, the sigh of leaves remembering light, the breath of something holy that has never stopped growing, the garden that never died, still alive, still waiting, still remembering us. It is said that beneath the Vatican, deeper than the catacombs, deeper than the bones of saints and the relics of kings, there lies a vault where silence breathes. No map records it. No priest speaks of it. It has no door, only an archway carved from black stone, polished smooth by centuries of unseen hands. And within it is neither dark nor light, but something in between, a twilight woven from memory. They call it the Vault of Echoes. For there, beneath the pulse of the living world, sound itself is said to sleep. Every hymn, every sermon, every confession whispered into the air above, they are not lost. The walls of that chamber remember. They drink the vibration, cradle it, hold it in the pores of their ancient stone, and sometimes when the moonlight finds its way through the cracks above, the vault exhales, and the past is heard again. The story begins with a monk named Aurelio. He was not remarkable, not a scholar nor a saint. He tended candles in the basilica, polished chalices, and swept the dust from marble saints that would never look back at him. But he possessed one gift, an ear that could hear what others could not. As a boy, he had listened to the sound of frost forming on glass, to the slow expansion of wood in winter, to the faint murmur of bees inside the church's carved pillars. It was said that when he prayed, even silence seemed to lean closer. One night, while extinguishing candles near the high altar, Aurelio felt the faintest tremor beneath his feet, a note so low it was almost thought rather than sound. It rose through the stone like a sigh. He knelt and placed his ear to the marble floor. What he heard was not a voice, not music, but memory, the ghost of something once spoken. It called to him softly, like breath through a keyhole. From that night onward, he could no longer sleep. The next evening, he followed the sound. He moved through the basilica in darkness, the moon a silver flame through stained glass. Downward he went, past the crypt, through corridors older than Rome itself. The air grew cooler, damp with age. He carried a single candle whose light seemed to shrink with every step. At last he found it, a narrow passage behind a crumbling fresco of the Archangel Michael. The wall gave way to a staircase that spiraled into the earth, carved not by tools but by patience. Each step echoed, and each echo came back different. The sound of his footfall returned slower, deeper as though reflected from years instead of stone. When he reached the bottom, the air was thick with stillness. Before him opened a vast chamber, a vault whose ceiling curved like the inside of a bell. The walls shimmered faintly in the candlelight, veined with mineral patterns that resembled the flow of sound made visible. He stepped inside. Immediately, his breath came back to him. Not as breath, but as music, soft and stretched, lingering long after it should have faded. It was as if the chamber refused to let sound die. Aurelio began to walk. Each motion sent ripples of noise moving outward, folding upon themselves, layering into harmonies he could not understand. He whispered a prayer, and his words came back to him not once, but many times, each whisper older than the last, each one wearing the tone of another voice. Then he realized they were not his words. He froze. The echoes continued, forming a weave of voices, men and women, the aged and the young, monks, popes, heretics, confessors. Some wept, some sang. Some spoke so softly he could not tell if they were words or simply longing given shape. Aurelio sank to his knees, candle trembling in his hand. He pressed his palm to the wall, and it pulsed faintly beneath his touch, like skin. And in that pulse he heard them, not with his ears, but through his bones. The laughter of a child running through the nave of a forgotten church, the broken chant of martyrs singing as flames rose around them, the sigh of a dying pope confessing his final doubt, all of it alive, woven into the stone. The vault did not keep relics of flesh or bone. It kept sound, the resonance of belief itself. He began to visit the chamber each night. At first he listened timidly, tracing the walls with careful fingers. But the vault seemed to know him, and the longer he stayed, the more it revealed. He learned that sound never truly vanishes. It only softens, becoming something deeper, something like memory. He heard psalms sung in languages the world had forgotten. He heard the rustle of robes long turned to dust, the faint toll of bells that no longer hung from any steeple. Sometimes he thought he heard his own name, whispered not in greeting but in recognition. Each night the voices grew closer. Each night the line between hearing and being heard grew thinner. He stopped speaking to others. Words felt too fragile, too temporary. In the refectory, when others spoke, he would stare at their lips and think of how their voices would someday sink into the vault below. How every argument, every prayer, every vow would find its way down through the stone and join the eternal hum. He began to dream of sound, not melodies or words, but waves of vibration spiraling like galaxies, folding endlessly upon themselves, and when he awoke, he could still hear them. It was on the 7th night that the vault spoke back. Aurelio entered the chamber as before, candlelight trembling like a golden echo. But the moment he stepped across the threshold, the air vibrated as though stirred by invisible wings. He whispered a prayer. But before his voice faded, it was answered not in Latin, not in any tongue he knew. It was sound without shape, a choir of memory, the very echo of time. The walls pulsed with it. The air shimmered. The candle flame bent sideways, as if drawn toward the voices themselves. He pressed his hand again to the wall, and this time it was not cool. It was warm, alive, beating like the heart of the earth, and he realized he was not listening to the voices of others. He was listening to his own. Every thought he had ever spoken, every prayer half whispered into the dark was here, waiting. The vault remembered him too. His breath slowed. His heartbeat fell into rhythm with the low hum around him. He began to sing, not from will, but from instinct. A single note trembling, pure. The sound joined the vast harmony of the chamber, blending until it was no longer his. His voice stretched, faded, dissolved, and yet it did not disappear. It simply became part of the endless tone. For a moment there was no monk, no vault, no world, only sound suspended between existence and silence. And then even that faded. When morning came, the brothers found his candle still burning at the top of the stairwell. The passage below had sealed itself, the fresco intact once more. The air was still, the silence deep and complete. They searched for Aurelio, but found only his robe, folded neatly upon the steps, and a faint tremor in the stone, as though the walls had recently sighed. Above, life continued. The bells rang, the choir sang, pilgrims came and went. None noticed that the sound carried a new depth, a faint, warm resonance, as if one more voice had joined the chorus of eternity. The Vatican's archives mention nothing of the vault, nothing of the monk who vanished. Yet the older priests still tell the story, not softly, like a lullaby for the faithful who fear their words are lost to time. They say the vault still breathes beneath the marble, that it swells with every prayer whispered in the dark. And when the moon is high, if you listen closely in the basilica's nave, you may hear a hum beneath the silence, a sound like the turning of centuries, or the quiet vibration of belief itself. Perhaps Aurelio is there still, not dead but absorbed, a note in the great hymn of the earth, resonating through the veins of stone. And perhaps that is what eternity truly is, not endless light or endless peace, but the echo of every word ever spoken in hope, in love, in faith. A single sound, held forever in the deep breath of creation. It is said the vault sleeps again now. Its walls cool, its hum dimmed. The moon no longer finds its cracks. The world above hums too loudly to hear what it keeps. But beneath, deep within the bones of the Vatican, the air waits. The stone remembers. And one day, when the noise of all things finally fades, the vault will exhale once more, and the world will hear itself again, not as it is, but as it was, a prayer made of echoes, a silence filled with sound, the moonlit vault of echoes. It is said that beneath the Vatican, beneath its marble halls and the hum of endless prayer, there is a door that has never been opened. It stands at the heart of the secret archives, in a chamber where the air itself seems older than stone. The walls bear the scent of dust and candle smoke, of time folded upon itself. The locks, 7 in all, are fashioned of gold and iron, each one carved with symbols that no one living can translate. The door has no hinges, no seam. It seems less constructed than grown from the surrounding wall, as though the Vatican was built around it. A heart sealed in flesh. Some call it the door of silence. Others, the gate of the beginning. The archivists, who tend to their records in the hush of eternity, say it guards not relics, not bones, not books, but light. A light that predates the world. No one knows who placed it there or when. But all who work within those endless corridors know its presence. They speak in whispers when they pass near, for the air grows warmer there, pulsing faintly, like breath through a veil. And it is said that when all other candles have burned out, that light, unsealed, unseen, and still glows. The story begins, as all final stories must, with a weary soul seeking peace. He was a scholar of forgotten faiths, nameless now, though his notes still sleep in the Vatican's restricted vaults. For decades he studied the languages of silence, the tongues of mystics, the hymns of ruins, the gestures of saints who wrote nothing at all. But knowledge, as it often does, had begun to hollow him. He knew too much of words and too little of wonder. The scriptures he once adored had turned to riddles. The certainty he once carried now trembled like a candle in wind. He came to Rome not in search of truth but of stillness. Yet stillness, it seemed, fled from him, until one night. While sorting manuscripts in the lowest corridor of the archives, he felt it. A tremor, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat beneath the floor. The other scholars did not notice. But to him it was unmistakable, the pulse of something living beneath the marble. He followed it through the labyrinthine halls, past shelves of forgotten papal decrees and glass cases holding relics no one remembered how to venerate. At last, he reached a staircase descending into darkness. The air below was thick, metallic, ancient. The candle in his hand burned with a steady flame, refusing to flicker, and he knew, without reason, without faith, that he had been summoned. The stairs ended in a circular chamber carved directly into the bedrock. There it stood, the door. Its surface shimmered faintly, as if it held light within its veins. The scholar felt warmth radiating from it, gentle but constant like the memory of sunlight. He knelt before the first lock. It bore the mark of a spiral, the eternal returning to itself. When his fingers brushed it, the metal trembled, and the lock turned soundlessly. The second bore the image of a keyhole without a key, a symbol of faith seeking entrance to the infinite. It opened when he breathed upon it. The third was shaped like an eye, closed. It opened not by touch, but when he whispered, "I am not looking for you." One by one, the locks released themselves, not through force, but through surrender. By the time he reached the seventh, the scholar's hands were trembling. His candle still burned, unflinching. The flame seemed almost to listen. The seventh lock had no symbol, only a single indentation, as if something long ago had pressed its shape into the metal. A fingertip, perhaps. Or a tear. He placed his thumb upon it. It opened without sound. And the door, which had no hinges, simply ceased to be. He expected darkness. Instead, the room beyond glowed softly, not from any visible source, but from the air itself. It was not the light of fire or of sun, but of thought, a luminescence that seemed to breathe. The chamber was empty. No relic, no altar, no scripture. Only smooth stone and stillness. And in that stillness, the scholar felt a sound, faint, rhythmic, and the same pulse he had followed downward. He stepped inside. The air felt weightless, tender. The light brushed against his skin like a sigh. He realized, with a start, that his shadow had vanished. He tried to lift his candle, but the flame no longer shone. Not because it had died, but because the light around him had absorbed it, swallowed it, made it unnecessary. Here, there was no distinction between light and shadow, no edge between silence and song. The scholar fell to his knees. He could not name what he felt, only that it was both vast and intimate, like being remembered by the world itself. He closed his eyes, but the light remained. He thought of the countless candles burned in churches across the centuries, each one an imitation of this radiance. He thought of all the prayers whispered upward, not to gods or saints, but to the unknown, and how this light seemed to hold them all, woven into its quiet shimmer. He knelt there for hours, or perhaps only moments. Time seemed to dissolve. as though even the idea of counting had no meaning here. The light deepened, not in brightness but in feeling. It seemed to speak, not in words but in memory. He saw flashes of ancient days, the desert wind moving over the bones of prophets, the ink of lost gospels drying beneath trembling hands, the birth of stars reflected in the eyes of those who first believed. He saw himself as a child, listening to the sound of rain against a chapel roof, thinking that perhaps God was whispering to the earth. He understood at last that the light was not an object, but a presence, the residue of everything that has ever hoped. It was the echo of creation itself, the moment before the first word was spoken. And perhaps, he thought, this was what the old theologians meant when they wrote of the uncreated light, the brightness that came before brightness, the knowing that came before thought. But as he reached out to touch it, something stopped him, a voice, his own or the room's. He could not tell, whispered softly, "Not all light is meant to reveal." He withdrew his hand. For revelation, he realized, is only one side of knowing. The other is reverence. And so he remained kneeling, the candle in his hand now a cold wick between his fingers. When he finally rose, the air had changed. The light no longer glowed as before, but lingered like memory after a dream. Something felt, not seen. He turned back toward the door, though there was no boundary to cross. With one step, he found himself again in the circular chamber, the 7 locks gleaming faintly. Behind him, the light was gone. He placed the extinguished candle upon the floor and bowed his head. His heart was quiet, his mind emptied of questions. He did not know what he had found, only that something within him had ceased to search. When he ascended the staircase, dawn had already touched the sky above. The bells of the city began to ring. No one saw him leave. He returned to his small study, placed the candle on his desk, and never spoke of what he had seen. His notes from that night contain only a single sentence written in careful Latin, lux non docet. Lux memorat. The light does not teach. The light remembers. He died many years later, quietly, his final words unrecorded. And in the archives, beneath the hum of centuries, the door remains. The locks are whole again. The chamber is sealed, but the archivists who pass near it say that sometimes, in the deepest hours of night when all other candles have burned low, a faint glow seeps from beneath the threshold, pale, steady, patient. They say it does not illuminate, it soothes. And in that gentle radiance the dust seems to pause its fall, as if the stars themselves have come to rest beneath the earth. Perhaps it was never meant to be opened. Perhaps it was never locked at all. Perhaps the light waits not behind doors of stone, but within us, quiet, unassuming, eternal. And maybe that is why the scholar's candle never flickered, even in the depths below, because some flames do not burn, they remember. And when all things fade, when the world itself grows tired, that light will remain, breathing softly in the silence, the first and last illumination, the light behind the locked door.